Great. What are we here for today? To learn. Oh my. Oh my. Okay, well, let's do that. What are we going to talk about today? Does anyone remember? Prophecy. Good one. Okay. Yeah. The testimony of Yeshua. Does anyone remember that from the first night? What's the testimony of Yeshua? Spirit of prophecy. Nice. We got that in the last book of the Bible. Same author. He calls it the testimony of Yeshua. And then he calls it at the end of the book the spirit of prophecy. And it's really interesting at the book of Revelation where he says that this is what God the Father gave to his Son, Yeshua, to the angel, then to John, and then John was supposed to give it to the church. So it's the testimony of Yeshua. It's that prophetic line of events that he gave his people as a gift. And so many people, they're so scared of this stuff, but really we should embrace it because, as I said the other night, it's a roadmap for us. It's so that we can know how he's leading us through the events that are transpiring in the world. And not only that, we can know what the enemy's going to do before he does it. Because we've been reading about what the enemy's going to do. What's he going to do? Does anyone remember? He's going to deceive, and he's going to destroy. Yeah, he's going to do that. And our Father's people, us, we will be prime targets. And so if we're ahead of the game, if we look in the Old Testament and some of these ancient books, they tell us that the prophet would warn the king of Israel and they would know where not to be when the enemy was going to come. So I rather suspect that we're going to see things like that again as well. So we're going to be looking, we're going to go back into the book of Daniel again, and we're going to go into Daniel chapter what? Does anyone remember? 7, right. We've been in Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 10 through 12, and we've been sort of chipping away at a little bit of Revelation. We're going to go into Daniel 7. We'll do a little tiny review, and then we'll go back into Daniel 7 where we were, and then we're going to hit Revelation pretty hard because Revelation chapter 13 and 14 are really the result of Daniel chapter 7. So we can almost go back and forth between Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, and we're going to see that today. And we're going to see some things that have been hidden from the minds of many for many, many years. So before we start, let's ask for some guidance. Father in heaven, we thank you again for this day. We thank you for the Shabbat, that we can rest in you, rest from our labors and rest in you. We ask, Father, as we do this, as we search your word, that you be with us. The Spirit that inspired it, we're asking, will reveal its secrets to us. We ask these things in Yeshua's name. We pray. Amen. Okay, so we are on part 4. So what were we looking at on the opening night? We started at Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. These are the launch chapters, and the reason why is because the disciples asked, what is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And I think when I asked if anyone believes that we're living at the end of the age, did you put up your hand? Yes, I think everyone in here would put up their hand. That's why you're interested in these prophecies, because Yeshua said we need to be interested in these prophecies in the time of the end. So that's what we're looking at. And of course, we went through some signs in that. Deception was the major thing. We looked at a bit of a timeline here. It's called the times of the Gentiles. In Luke, it calls it that. And then we saw, of course, there's a beginning and an end. It starts with war, and it will end with war. And everything in between, we looked at famines would happen after the war, and that would be a result of the magnitude of the war. Famines will happen after, and then pestilence. We're seeing pestilence. Who's watching the news? This is a little thing they got going on with the coronavirus. Although you hear on one hand, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. But on the other hand, you're reading the newspaper or looking at the internet, and we've got cancellation of cruises and airplane rides and all kinds of things. These confined spaces, people are getting a little afraid. Travel will become very difficult when some of this stuff happens. It's going to be a whole lot different, because this is just a little, what we're seeing today in the news, I believe, is just a little prelude, just a little wake-up call, if you will, to what we've got coming. Natural disasters, and then it tells us persecution. And it's amazing how all of this brings on persecution, and it will be because of all these things. They're going to be looking for something that's causing all of this. And everyone needs a scapegoat. You know, I used to do construction work, and I used to, I knew this term scapegoat. And what I didn't want to be is a scapegoat on a construction site. Does anyone do construction here? Well, there was always somebody at the end of the job that everything gets blamed on him because his guys didn't show up at the right time, or something went wrong when he and you just don't want to be the scapegoat. Well, it looks like the persecution is going to be against Yah's people. So guess who's the scapegoat? Right, they will be used as a scapegoat. We need to get back to God, they will say, and then we need to start worshiping the way that we should. And of course, the New World Order, their form of worship is quite a bit different than the Bible's form of worship and our Father's form of worship. And this is where everything's going to start going sideways, and we're going to get into that quite a bit tonight. And then Yeshua said, but when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, you need to understand this. So this is one of the things that we need to understand for sure. Time of trouble, he said, will follow on the heels of the abomination of desolation. And of course, he was quoting right out of the book of Daniel. So if he's talking about the time of the end and the abomination of desolation happening at the time of the end, and that's when the time of trouble is, if we're living in the time of the end, then we need to know about these things. So naturally, we go back into the book of Daniel, and we found out that Yeshua showed up in the book of Daniel, and he was telling these prophecies, which we're going to see today, are outlined again in the book of Revelation. It's very interesting. In the mouth of how many witnesses? 2 or 3 witnesses, everything's established. Well, it's interesting that statement was about putting someone to death in a court setting, because you can't put somebody to death under just one person's word. You need a witness. But when we start looking at the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel, there's going to be a whole lot of people that are going to lose their lives for or against the truth. And he has given us 2 witnesses of the same things. Both Daniel and the book of Revelation, they are actually seeing and telling us the same story. And we're really going to get into that today. So this is an exciting one for me, because this is when it starts to really tie these 2 books together. Are you ready? Yep. Because we're going to go pretty fast. There's going to be a lot of information. And if you have a pen or something, you can jot down some of this. But do remember, these things are going to be on the internet, and you'll be able to go through them again. I rather suspect you might want to go through them a few more times just to see them, because, I'm just sitting here and I put all this information together that I've been looking at for like 30 years plus. So I'm thinking it'll take you more than one session to get through it. And that's great. That's good. So we also saw, when we went back to those prophecies that Yeshua was talking about, Daniel chapter 8, where the abomination of desolation is mentioned, Daniel 10 through 12, where it's mentioned, once in Daniel 11, and then again in Daniel chapter 12, with a time period this time. And we also had a time period in Daniel chapter 8 that we looked at. So we saw at the beginning of these 2 chapters, Daniel was taken in vision. Once in Daniel chapter 8, the Uli, it said he was taken by the side of the river Uli. And then in Daniel chapter 10, he was taken beside the river Hiddekel, or the Tigris. Very interesting that we look at where these two rivers meet, and it was actually center stage for this Middle East showdown that we have coming up. That's right in the midst of the kings of Media and Persia. And we're going to see two great civilizations, if you can call it Judeo-Christian civilization, the commonalities that they have, and they will be squaring off against Islam. You remember that? That's what we talked about, I think, on the second night. And we went through that and showed how that's the war that Yeshua said would begin the time of the end, this ram and he-goat war. And that's what we looked at. We equated the kings of Media and Persia, exactly the same areas that Islam in the Middle East is, and the United Nations being that power from the west coming across the surface of the whole earth. Interesting, we looked at the configuration of the United Nations. They have 5 major nations that basically control the world, as it were. They're called the 5 permanent members. And we just so happen to have 5 mentioned in the prophecies. We have in Daniel 8, it tells us, therefore, the male goat, so this UN block grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn, the United States, was broken. And in its place, 4 notable ones, or 4 dominant ones, come up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So we looked at that being the UK, China, Russia, and the European Union being those blocks of nations. Tells us in Daniel 8 at the end of the chapter, as for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that goat nation, but not with its power. So and we can see this as we look at the world today. There is not another nation that is as strong as the United States, and evidently it says that there will be never another nation like that on its own. And why is that? Because we're going to see they're going to join to make a new world order. It becomes very, very strong. The goat grew very great, but when he became, the large horn was broken, that being the United States. That's us. And I'm a Canadian, I live up in Canada, but whatever happens down here, when Uncle Sam sneezes, we get out of the way because we can feel it. So whatever happens down here, we are going to be in the same boat, as it were. So we can see 5 minus 1 being the United States, being lowered in stature, 4 remaining form the New World Order, Great Britain, Russia, China, France, the European Union. And we can see this is exactly what happens. And then it goes on to say in Daniel 8, verse 9, out of one of them, so out of one of the ones that's remaining, it says, came a little horn, or a little kingdom, which grew exceedingly great. So this little horn, this little kingdom, grows exceedingly great towards the south, toward the east, and towards what land? The glorious land, which we determined was Israel. Sure, the land of Israel, the land of promise. That's what the Bible talks about when it's talking about the glorious land. And then we saw that there was a timeline in Daniel chapter 8. It says, the vision of the evenings and mornings which was told is true. Therefore, seal up the vision. And now let's just look at that, because we're going to hit that on this one again today. We were told that how long would be 2,300 evenings and mornings. We went all through that. If you need some review, or anyone online that hasn't seen this yet, I would recommend you go back and have a look at how we came up with that. 2,300 evenings and mornings. And speaking of the daily, when we take that back to the book of Numbers, chapter 28, it tells us there was a continual offering, one in the morning, one in the evening. Daniel talks about this thing being taken away, or an opposition to it. And we determined here that if you had 2,300 dailies, or morning and evenings, it would actually be divided in 2 to find out how many days, and we're suggesting here 1,150 days. And once we see the timeline, how this all fits in, it makes a lot more sense. It kind of takes out the guesswork in that as well. So here we see we have the daily being taken away, and there's an event at the end of this time period. Does anyone remember what it was at the end of this 2300 evening and morning? It said then the sanctuary would be cleansed, right? And so what we're looking at here in these prophecies, they're hard to understand if you don't bring the sanctuary language into it, because we know, we've talked about the idea that the sanctuary actually has appointed times. In fact, if you didn't have any appointed times in the sanctuary, it would be just a building stuck frozen in time, because nothing would be happening. The only time that anything happened in the sanctuary was a process through the sanctuary times, from the morning and evening through to the monthly, through to the weekly, and all the way through the calendar on the annual events. It was all revolved around a timing, which we determined is prophecy in itself. So if we have prophecies of the time of the end, and we have a calendar of events of the time of the end, we should be able to insert that into the prophecies, and that's what we're seeing. We saw that in Daniel 8, where it talks about this cleansing of the sanctuary, and we know that that's sanctuary language when it comes to sanctuary. So we know at that time that would be in reference to a sanctuary time and judgment. The sanctuary is cleansed on the Day of Atonement. If you haven't done some homework on the Day of Atonement, it'd be a great idea. That's a good starting point would be Leviticus chapter 16. And also you can go into the book of Hebrews. It deals with Yeshua as our high priest, because that was the time that the high priest in the old sanctuary would go into the innermost part of the sanctuary, and he'd cleanse the camp of all sin. Then you would start afresh. And of course, this is symbolizing once at the end of the ages, the writer of Hebrews says, once at the end of the ages, he will return to not deal with sin. He's going to deal with saving his people from the presence of sin. So this is a good thing that he's going to do when he comes back. So we see this judgment happening, and we see another timetable in Daniel. So we added to that. We started on the daily being taken away, and that's exactly where we were. And then we added to that one. We added, and we saw that there was another one. Does anyone remember what the next one was? How about that? Abomination of Desolation. Can you see that? Abomination of Desolation, and that happened at 1290, right? You remember that? And then we had one more time period in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 12, verse 12, I believe, tells us that there's one more, and that is day 1335. The way that it reads, it would seem that 1335 is the last day. It's the day that Yeshua referred to Martha, that he would rise again. And she said, I know he'll rise in the last day. And this looks like the last day. This looks like the resurrection day. And when we're looking at the calendar and the timeline, that would very likely be the resurrection at 1335. And it just so happens to be, if you count from 1150 all the way to the day of first fruits, you could get 185 days, exactly the distance between 1335 and 1150. So we can see these things fit in. It would be fitting in my mind that the day that Yeshua was raised from the dead, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, we're told that he is a type of those that would be raised at the end. So if he's a type in kind, it's very, very possible that he would be a type in time as well, because the sanctuary is locked in on two dimensions. One is kind and time. They both have to go together. So Yeshua was actually a fulfillment of what else? What was Yeshua a fulfillment of? Something that they did all the time on the day of first fruits. Cutting that, going into the barley field and cutting that, right? That's why in Corinthians he says Paul says he's the first fruits of those that slept. Well, the barley was the first fruits, wasn't it? So the barley was, so he was a fulfillment of the barley harvest, but it actually gets better because then once Yeshua was raised, he goes out into the field, the graveyard, and it says the rocks broke open and many that slept in the dust of the earth. Those are a type as well as those that will be raised at the end. So he rose those people on the day of first fruits. Here again, sanctuary time is the only day that we see a resurrection. So we've got to really start looking at some possibilities here of when these time periods can be. Okay, so let's, so there's our math that we had. 1335 minus 1150 gives us 185 days. And we looked at that timing being the time where first fruits would fall. So now let's jump back into Daniel 7. That was just a recap to bring us up because some of this stuff we're going to need as we move forward in our minds. Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions on his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Now we've seen these few first verses, but we just want to tie them in quickly. We saw how that statue at the beginning of Daniel chapter 2, was a succession of kingdoms. And if you look at these kingdoms, they were the superpowers, if you will, in the then known world. So they are a list of superpowers. We get down to the last one, which is the one that we're in. There's no more at the bottom. And we're told that in the days of these kings, the days of the Toe kingdom, is when our Father will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. So this is what we're looking for, this period down in the bottom of the statue. So at the end, we know in the book of Revelation, we have to have 10 kings at the end. So we're looking at how are we going to get these 10 kings at the end. And so this is what I was suggesting, that when you put Daniel 7 out there now, and historically, people have applied these prophecies in times past, but when we really examine them, which we're going to do today, we're going to see that they really don't fit as well as what we'd like them to fit, and we've got to look for something else. So when we look at these beasts of Daniel 7, nowhere in this prophecy does it say one takes the other one out, and they're a succession of kingdoms. This has been assumed because of this first vision. It's been assumed that it follows. I would like to suggest that it doesn't actually work as well as we'd like. And these kingdoms, when we start counting numbers, we're going to see that there are 10 kingdoms involved in these, and that makes it fit much, much better in the time of the end, which we're going to really take apart today. Daniel chapter 2, Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. Does anyone remember what the great sea is? Just let me have it. What's the great sea? Yeah, it's multitudes, nations. So we can determine by this, if this is a time of the end vision, we can expect that at the time of the end, there will be turmoil, there will be strife and all that. Is anyone seeing any of that? Is that a possibility that that's out there? We can see things really ramping up. There isn't a nation in the world that's really at peace. Someone was talking to me when they came in, and they said, what's going on in Saudi Arabia? Do you guys remember what I said about Saudi Arabia? Watch Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the last stalwart, if you will, for the West. If Saudi Arabia flips, if something happens in Saudi Arabia and they go more pro-Islamic, which there's a lot of pressure. Just this morning I saw an article that Prince bin Salman just put 3 of his very close relatives, his uncle, I believe it was his brother and somebody else, in jail because there's a suspected coup going to happen in Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia flips, we can determine that this war that's coming with Islam and the West will come much sooner. So this is what we're watching, and it's happening. I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow, but you can see there's really unrest in the Arab world with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is that fourth king that we talked about. And if you don't quite remember, or you didn't see that one, I think that was on night 2. You want to have a look at that, because that tells us the sequence of events into this war of the direction and how we're going to get there. So we can see that the great sea is being stirred up, unrest in the world, definitely. Unrest with China, unrest with Russia, with the EU, especially with the European Union and Great Britain, them coming out. The whole European Union will be restructured. That's going to be very interesting how that develops as well. That's another thing to watch for. And of course, the United States and Great Britain that we talked about as well. A lion with eagle's wings. It says the first was like a lion, had eagle's wings. I watched till the eagle's wings were plucked off. This is the same thing as the large horn being broken. We are looking at this, the possibility, if this is an end-time vision, we should be able to find some kings out there that are represented. Not too hard with an eagle and not too hard with a lion. They are the two dominant kingdoms and two that are the permanent members of the UN. These are kingdoms that will be reckoned with, and so on. Here again we saw a bear, and looks very much like this could be Russia. If the United States goes down, Russia will rise to dominance, and it says arise and devour much flesh. Here again we're looking at a leopard, a process of elimination. This four-headed leopard could very well be China plus what it takes in when the United States goes down also. They are very power hungry, and they need oil, and they're trying to figure out how they can get it. And their best bet is to take in those Asian nations, and some of them have oil and abundance of it. So that's how that goes. And then in the last beast that we're introduced to, after this I saw in the night vision, behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns. So here we see this has to be, and we can see in the prophecy, we don't need to guess what the horns are. It tells us the 10 horns are 10 kings that come out of this kingdom, that make up this joint amalgamated kingdom here. And of course, these kingdoms are these ones. This has to be the European Union, this fourth kingdom that's made up of a lot of kingdoms. Interesting, the European Union, if you want to do some homework on that, when it was first instituted, first came to be, there was 10 kingdoms actually started it. It was called the Western European Union, and it was structured much like the United Nations. In fact, they probably structured it after the United Nations. There was 10 sort of permanent members, and then there were associate members and so on. I rather suspect when the European Union gets finalized and when it really comes together, it'll be structured much like the UN and the design of it. It goes on to say in Daniel 7 verse 8, I was considering the horns, so the horns on this multi-kingdom, I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first 10 horns, I threw in 10 so we can get a picture of that were plucked out by the roots, and there in this horn were the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking pompous words. So here we see 10 horns, we see an uprooting of 3, and then we see another horn that's probably in growing. It was uprooting as it went. Now, if this little horn is growing and it's the one that becomes very great, which we saw in Daniel chapter 8, it's very possible that these 3 that get uprooted when it's growing would be in opposition to it. Does that make sense? They're not in favor of this. So this is something that we cannot nail down 100%. All we know for sure, as far as I'm concerned, what I believe I know, is that the European Union, as it finalizes in its structure, will have 7, if you will, permanent members, and it will have many more associate members, but there will be 7, and they will go along with this little horn that becomes great and actually will be the dominant force in the European Union. And you might have some guesses on who that is, but I'm not going to say who it is because I probably don't have to. You probably already know. It's interesting. When I used to teach at the college, I would be with the students, and every once in a while they get on this idea about a one world order and new world order and all this kind of stuff. Very interesting. These are secular students. You want to believe that people are talking about this out here, out in the world. And you guys know what's coming. You should feel very bold when you talk to people because people are thinking about this. We're just not aware of it. But anyways, I would go and I would sit down with them. And I said, well, what are you guys talking about? Because I'd overhear. And I would start quoting from the Bible and not say where I'm getting this information from. One text says that he doesn't have an army, and there's an army that's given over to him. Another text, he comes in peaceably. And another one, he has all the respect of the world leaders. And I would just kind of lead them on in that area. And 9 out of 10 times, they were right in their guesses. It was absolutely amazing. And these people had no Bible knowledge whatsoever. I was just giving them the clues. And as we go through this, it becomes very evident who this power is. And we might even get there tonight, but we may not as well. We got a lot to cover. So, Daniel 7, I've just done a little math for you, and I keep saying all you got to do to know these prophecies and understand them is be able to count to 10. And that's just how easy it is. 10 minus 3 gives you how many? So there's 7 horns left, right? Would you agree? Now, this is our first problem for those of you, and I know there will be many online, that will know the historical application. So I just want to help people see this. When we got down to the 10 toes, we saw there was 10 toes. It says that in the prophecies in the days of these kings. That was Daniel chapter 2. And we can see that we've just done some simple math here, that if this historical application concept, for you that are not familiar, is said that this was something that happened out of Rome, some of the kingdoms, the Os and the Ostrogoths and the Franks and so on, they made up these 10 tribes. But in the same breath, we say that 3 of them were uprooted, primarily by the work of the papacy. Sometimes the numbers are manipulated a little bit just so they get to where we need to. But the fact remains, if 3 of these early tribes in the 500s and so on AD were uprooted and were gone forever, how many do you have left? 7, right? You still have 7. Revelation chapter 17 demands that we have 10 at the end. So this is why we're just looking at this a little closer to see if we've missed something, and that's what we need to do. Daniel chapter 8, so we're starting to now layer this thing. We're gonna act in a sense that these prophecies are all one. You can almost, and you'll get to this if you keep studying, you'll almost get to the place where it doesn't matter who said it anymore. As long as it's out of Daniel or Revelation, it's going to fit together. So it's nice to have the reference, but you'll see here we can just add these things together and do this. So here, a little more information from Daniel about this horn. And out of one of them came a little horn, grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. So this thing that's going to come out of the European Union is ultimately, from Daniel chapter 8 now, we can see ultimately he's going to end up in Jerusalem. Now, do you know any powers that are eyeing Jerusalem? I don't know if you do, but that's another clue as to who this may be. Out of one of them came a little horn, and he ultimately will go to the glorious land. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. The question is asked, how long? And so it says, the question, how long, is in direct regard to this little horn's activity, the taking away of the daily, this trotting the sanctuary underfoot, and the abomination and so on. It's all in direct connection with what the little horn is doing. We're going to see this in Daniel chapter 7 again. Daniel sees in Daniel chapter 7, he sees all these events, he gets the little horn, sees persecution, then he wants to know about the little horn. This is exactly the same thing here. The time frame, the 2300, is directly in connection to the activities of the little horn. This is consistent with all of these prophecies. We're going to see here that the little horn gets center stage when it comes to timetable timelines in these prophecies. So the 2300 is no different from there. It's still got to do with the little horn. And also we want to look at Revelation now. We're going to keep 7:8 up on the screen. This little horn comes out, mouth speaking great things. Revelation 13:5, which is exactly the same player here we see. It says, he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and was given authority to continue how many months? 42 months. So now we've got another timetable that's got to do with the little horn power. So we can now assume that we have a 2300 that has to do with the little horn power, and we also have a 42-month period with the little horn power. We're going to see that as we get back to Daniel again. We're going to see this exact same thing again. But let's just stay in Revelation for just a minute here, and we're going to see here in Revelation chapter 12. Now, I want to stop here when I say this because Revelation is actually divided up into 7 sections. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there are actually 6 second comings of Yeshua. There are 6 divisions. So you can get there. You get to every time it talks about the second coming. What that is a layer. And then it gives another layer. And then the second coming again. And another layer, another layer, another layer, another layer. Chapter 12 is the beginning of another layer. It talks about events. Daniel chapter 12, Daniel chapter 13, Daniel chapter 14 are all one layer, and it ends at the second coming again. Very interesting what we see here. This is the same time frame that's talking about in Daniel chapter 7 and in Daniel 8 regarding the little horn power. It says, now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. Now we've seen this, and this application has been applied to when Yeshua was born. The Roman Empire didn't like that. Another king would arrive. Well, there's also another group of people that are being born at the end, and we saw this in Isaiah. Does anyone remember what it says in Isaiah? A nation would be born in one day after travail. We looked at that one of the other nights. And this is what we see in Revelation. So in the time of the end, Yeshua talks about birth pains. The birth pains are to deliver our Father's child. That's what it is. And that's the likes of you and me. We want to be part of that birth of that nation. And ultimately, when Yeshua arrives, they will be numbered. And some believe that number could be 144,000. Have you ever heard of that before? Yeah, that could be that male child that is going to be born, that virgin child that talks about in Revelation chapter 14. Did we finish that verse? Yes, we did. Goes on to say Revelation 12:3, and it says, I saw another sign in heaven. Behold, a fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems, crowns on its heads. Now we want to have a good look at this one here. What I'm suggesting here is this is the 4th beast from Daniel 7. Daniel 7, 4th beast had how many horns to start with? 10. And then it had how many uprooted? Which would end up with 7 ruling powers. This beast has how many heads? But it has 10 horns. How many crowns? 7. Does it see that? 7 diadems or crowns. So let's try and make some sense out of this. This empire started with 10 main, just like Daniel 7. And then 3 were uprooted. So how many does it end up with? 7 ruling powers. This is the 7 heads now. These are the 7 heads of this kingdom. So in Daniel chapter 12 is a revelation actually in reverse of what Daniel saw. Daniel first saw the lion, the bear, the leopard, and then he saw the 4th beast. In John's chapter 12, he reverses the whole thing, as we're going to see here. We're going to see that. And there's a reason why that is. So here we have 10, same story. We end up with 7 kings or 7 heads on this one. Revelation 13 verse 5 says, and he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue 42 months. And we're looking at this beast here. This is where this little horn power comes from. So this beast, this Revelation chapter 12 beast, will have a spokesperson, this little horn, that will be guiding it. And ultimately, it will be in control of the whole world. Revelation 12:14 tells us, and the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, to her place where she is nourished for a time and times and a half a time from the presence of the serpent. So this is this persecuting power, this dragon, this persecuting power led by 10 kings and a little horn. And it's this woman, which is our Father's church, will flee into the wilderness. This is another thing I tell people. This isn't a spiritual wilderness. This is a wilderness to get away. It talks about a flood consuming the people of the earth, and they flee from this flood that the serpent goes through. So we're going to look at a little timeline here. We have 42 months. Divided by 12, because that would tell us how many years 42 months would be, and that works out to 3.5, or a time, a times, and a half a time. And if we're looking at Moedim, it would be 1 cycle, 2 cycles, and a half a cycle, which would be 3.5 years as well. And we're going to see this. The reason why I'm bringing out these time periods here, and the ones that are involved, this little horn power, we're going to go back to Daniel 7. We're going to see exactly the same time period, this time times and a half in Daniel chapter 7. And we're going to get some more events as to why it's persecuting, how it's persecuting, and so on, what it's doing. So we're going to get back there. First, we want to spend a little bit of time in Revelation yet. Revelation 13:6 tells us, then he opened his mouth in blasphemy. Now this is the little horn power, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and overcome them. This is exactly what we're going to see in Daniel chapter 13 or Daniel chapter 7. Again, we're going to see he's going to do the same thing, same time periods, same war against the saints and overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. Daniel chapter 12, if you remember, the question was asked, how long? And the answer came back unto a time, times, and a half a time, until the power of the holy people has been completely shattered. And we can see this is actually connecting to this time period as well. So then when we look at this, we can see these 4 kingdoms in Daniel chapter 7. This is when they're all separate. We can see that the little horn comes out of the horn, the 4th beast that has 10 horns. Remember, 3 are uprooted. This is important. We can't miss this. I keep hammering on that because it's all part of these prophecies and recognizing what's going on here. It says that this little horn has a mouth speaking great things, as we have seen. Now we see in Daniel chapter 13, very interesting. We see in Daniel chapter 13, we see an amalgamation of this beast. Daniel 7 beasts, 10 kingdoms, as we've looked at. They amalgamate, that's not how it's, amalgamate, sorry. And they join up to form one beast in Revelation 13. But there is one thing that is missing in Revelation 13. What is it? You guys tell me. The eagle's wings are missing. Exactly. We have all the beasts mentioned. It says that there's 7 heads, which represents the 4th beast of Daniel chapter 7, and Daniel chapter 12 comes together to form one beast in the 7 heads. It tells us, we're going to look at this, and then we see a lion, a bear, and a leopard, but there's no eagle's wings, because the eagle was what? The eagle's wings were plucked off, the large horn was broken, shattered, exploded, so on. So the eagle, or the United States, is not part of the New World Order when it gets going. You notice how I'm saying it's a New World Order, not a One World Order. Until the United States, North America joins up, and they surely will, and we're going to see this very clearly in these prophecies, they will come on board, but they won't be the dictator anymore. They will have to bow down to this New World Order, something that they're not used to doing. So this will be a New World Order when these beasts come together. And of course, that mouth speaking great things is still alive and well. It says that this beast will be given a mouth speaking great things. That's that entity, that's that kingdom, that small kingdom at first that will rise to become very great, because that little kingdom is going to rule the world and dictate the religious system that the world will embrace. A mouth speaking great things. Okay, so let's keep going here. Revelation 13:1, just so we can see what I'm saying is true. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads, and having 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns. Now, here's a little question. Here's your test for the day. And when we looked at Daniel 12, or Revelation chapter 12, how many crowns did that beast have? It said it had 7 heads, 10 horns, and how many crowns? 7, right. So that determines the amount of kingdoms that are actually ruling that 4th empire. It has 7 kingdoms. Now we see the 7 heads of that Revelation chapter 12 beast, that dragon beast, these empires. This European Union now becomes connected to, what does it say? It says it's got blasphemy on its heads. And it goes on to say, now the beast which I saw, this 7-headed beast, it was like a leopard. It had characteristics of the leopard. And it was like had the feet of a bear, the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave his power. We're going to see this in Daniel chapter 7, the bear, the leopard, the dreadful beast, and the lion are kingdoms. So in Revelation, we see these kingdoms coming together. It's a further revelation to what Daniel saw. This is why we need all these prophecies to come together. Now, when we look at this, we see 7 heads, or those 7 kings that are left over from the 4th beast. They come together with the leopard, the bear, and the lion. Theirs are 10 kings for the time of the end. These are the 10 dominant kingdoms at the time of the end. And we can be assured that our Father is not trying to pick up little kingdoms. It was always the major kingdoms. And just as it was in the past, talked about Babylon, Egypt, Medo-Persia, and so on. We're talking about the dominant kingdoms here at the end of time. And we go back to Daniel 2, these 10 kings. It says, in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. You tell me if that's not good news. You do know what good news is. They call it gospel, but I get really frustrated when they call it gospel because I'm not Greek. Let's just say what it is. It's good news is what it is. This is good news. All this stuff that's been going on history, all the death and destruction and so on, it's all coming to an end, and our Father is going to set up His kingdom. And if I'm reading the book of Revelation right, He's going to bring His throne down to this earth, and we're going to dwell with Him in the flesh. Can I hear anyone say amen to that? Oh yeah, this is going to be good. This is why it's called the good news. The kingdom that was lost at the beginning will be restored to even more glorious than it was in the beginning because His throne will be here. Now that to me is, I got something to look forward to. And that's what we're asked to share. That's what Yeshua asks us. Go and preach the gospel of the kingdom in all the world. And then the end will come. That's the good news. It's the kingdom is going to be restored. Revelation 13:3 tells us, and I saw one of its heads as if it had been mortally wounded. And his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. Okay, let's do a little history lesson. Let's go back to Daniel 8. And we talked about the UN becoming, remember where it said in Daniel chapter 8, verse 8? You want to write this down. It says in Daniel 8, verse 8, after the war, it says the goat became what? What did it say? Became very great. It became very great after the war, but when it became very great, the large horn was broken. Now, what is that goat power? That UN power becomes very great. What's just happened after the war? We've got peace on earth, right? The biggest threat to global warming has been put to rest. What is the greatest threat to global warming? Islam. Exactly. And I'm not trying to be silly, but there's people out there that think the temperature's rising out there, but that's a threat. And you know what? If it kept going and going and going, yeah, the Revelation actually tells us, it promises God's people at the end of time that they will neither be scorched by the sun or thirst anymore. That sounds like heat to me. Doesn't it sound like to you? There's a promise. Evidently, they're going to need a promise that has that kind of a promise to it, because it is going to warm up. Things are going to change. But that isn't the greatest threat that we have right now. And we've talked about that already. I'm not going to get into that. There's always a right-wing element, and they seem to get their way at times. So we see here that this goat power grows very great. This movement to a one-world peace. When they say peace and safety, we know what happens. They will move to that place where everything, it looks like, is going to be really good from here on in. And it says one of its heads as if it had been mortally wounded. Okay. I'm going to ask you a couple IQ questions here. What was the large horn? What did we say that the large horn on the goat was? Do you remember? The United States. The large horn that was broken was the United States. This is at the height of this New World Order movement. It's broken. And then it says the lion's wings were plucked off. Could it be that when these nations are coming together, this deadly wound is actually the United States, the biggest superpower this world has ever known, is broken off? Do you think that that would throw this New World Order movement into chaos? Absolutely. The number one power in the world goes down, is broken, is shattered. Now these other nations have to pick up the pieces. And this is what we see here. And it goes on to say, and I would say that this next verse helps us in this. It says, Revelation 13:4, it says, so they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast made up of 7 heads, and the lion, the bear, and the leopard. So this amalgamation of these kingdoms, this New World Order. And the question was asked, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? So we see here, a war happens. We have a New World Order, a new era of peace coming in. One of the main instigators that's pulling this thing together, this peace initiative, is the United States to bring this world into peace, get rid of this problem that we have. And then at the end of everything, when the smoke clears, the question is, who's left to make war against this beast? Now think about that. The United States goes down, you've got China, Russia, the UK, and the European Union. Who is left to make war against that? Who? Portugal? Maybe Argentina? No, seriously, there will be no contesters. There will be no one here left that can stop this thing. It is going to march right on through in this New World Order. And we saw what this New World Order has for a leader. it says, and he, the beast, was given a mouth. This is this little horn power, takes control. And I would like to suggest, because it looks like it from Daniel 11, it says he comes in peaceably. So, and he's intrigue, deception, all this stuff. And he brings this world together and to try and bring this world under one head. And of course, the little horn will be the head, and as long as everyone bows down to him. But this will only last for him for 42 months. This is what it tells us. Revelation 13, verse 6 says, then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. Revelation 13:7, it says, and it was granted him to make war with the saints, to overcome them. And authority was given over every tribe, tongue, and nation. Now don't shout it out, but is there a power in the past that has been alive for a long time that has persecuted the saints in the past? Now I wonder if that power got ultimate power, if persecution would be revived. What do you think? Oh yeah, absolutely. Revelation 13:8, all who dwell on the earth will worship him whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, this is for us. If we have ears to hear, let us hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience of the saints. That's talking about you and me in here somewhere. We're going to have to be patient. In Revelation chapter 14, it says, here is the endurance. Here's the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments. So we know who the saints are. It's very clear in Revelation who these people are. They are obedient to their Father. It says, here's the patience and the faith of the saints. When persecution is at its height, we will be asked to be patient. Why are we asked to be patient? Because he's going to set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. It's the gospel that we need to own and possess, because when everything's coming down upon us, without the belief, without owning these promises, we won't make it. We have to be all in at this time, or we just will not make it. Goes on. Let's look at this timetable again here in day 1. Now we're starting to put more of these things together. So in day 1, we saw in Daniel 8 and Daniel 10 through 12, Daniel 12 primarily, it says from the time the daily's taken away and the abomination of desolation set up. So we have our outward markers and everything in between. So the daily is the first thing. Then we saw in Daniel chapter 8, we saw another timeline connected to the daily as well. So here we see a starting point as well, and we saw that the sanctuary would be cleansed, sanctuary times, Day of Atonement. We saw that at day 1150. We saw another one, and that one was the Abomination of Desolation at 1290. This is, and one last one that we've seen already, that's this one at day 1335. And we talked about that one being the resurrection. We have one more that we're just going to add because of what we have just seen. We've got one more, and that one is the time period of, that's the little horns time period. We're told that that's 1260 days, or 42 months, or 3.5 years, or times and a half a time. We're going to now get our second witness out of the book of Daniel that this is indeed the same thing. We saw this in Revelation. This time period of 1260 days, whether it's 1260 days, 42 months, or times and a half, all equaling the same time period. There's a reason why it's given in different ways. But that time period is mentioned 7 times. And John, I'm going to put you on the spot. John called me aside the other night and he said, you know those time periods that are mentioned so many times? He said, do you know that they're given in 3 different languages? Isn't that interesting? Chaldean and Greek and Hebrew. Hebrew in chapter 12. And Greek, of course, in book of Revelation. And when you look, the interesting part, when you look in the Septuagint in Revelation where it says time, times, and half a time, and then you go back to Daniel, time, times, and half a time, it's the same words. So it's just really interesting that it's given in 3 different languages. I don't know, when I was going to school, did you guys learn about the Rosetta Stone? That Rosetta Stone had, apparently, I couldn't read it, but it had 3 different languages, and they all said the same story. So it was a way that they could actually figure out how to translate these languages together. So here we have we have a timetable that's gone 7 times, and we've got it in 3 different languages. So there's no reason to confuse this thing into how long it is. It's very, very straightforward when we look at all this evidence. Daniel chapter 8. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 8 here for a moment. Or Daniel chapter 7, verse 8. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among before whom 3 of the first, or 10 horns, were plucked up by the roots. And there in this horn were the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking pompous words. In Revelation 5, or 13:5, we see exactly the same thing, and we're given this time period of 42 months. Goes on in Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. Next verse, after this little horn is speaking, it goes on to a courtroom scene, and it says, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, and wheels of burning fire. Goes on, next verse. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. What kind of a scene is this? I hear the great white throne judgment. This, I'm thinking, this is the first of 2, and the great white throne is the second one. That one is later down the road, but this one is closer to us than that great white throne judgment. This is a judgment we're going to see here. This is very intriguing to me. In Daniel chapter 7, we see this judgment happen. What did we see in Daniel chapter 8? We saw sanctuary cleansing, which was, we said, the Day of Atonement, if we're looking at sanctuary time. What is the Day of Atonement in regard to the judgment? In regard to the judgment, what is the Day of Atonement? That's the end of it, right? It's the end of judgment. That's when the sanctuary is cleansed. That's when all the sins are given away. That's when God's people are declared clean or innocent, right? That happens. All their sins are taken out of the sanctuary. It's cleansed. That's the end of judgment. But the judgment actually begins, the judgment proper actually begins 10 days earlier. There's some different thoughts on this, but it looks like the judgment actually starts on the Feast of Trumpets, and that's the significant to get everyone's attention, because if we go through this judgment without knowing that we're in the judgment, we may be in bad shape. So I tell people, they want to know the sign of Yeshua's coming. The second coming is actually not the most important event in the future. It's the judgment, because the judgment happens before he arrives. Revelation tells us that when he comes, he says his reward is with him. It's already been determined what's going to happen when he arrives. And we can see in Daniel chapter 7 very clear here that during the time that the little horn is speaking, that's why we break into a judgment scene, so that when the saints, when we are being persecuted by this little horn power, when it is in control of the whole world, persecuting, putting people to death, we're going to know on the Feast of Trumpets that judgment has just started in the heavens. Now you tell me if that's not good news for us. I'm listening. That's good news. There's a lot of people that are scared of the judgment, but I'll tell you, when the judgment starts, we're going to be shouting for joy. Because that means the little horn's coming to an end, and that's exactly what it says. So the judgment happens during the time of the little horn. How many days into the little horn's activity when the sanctuary is cleansed? 1150. How many days does the little horn get? You guys know this. 1260. So the judgment, it's like the cup of the little horn is getting full, and our Father says, enough is enough. It's time for judgment. And this is the question, how long? It goes on to say in verse, so the judgment, which is a day of blowing. Also, when you look in this in the concordance, very interesting, it's also called the day of shouting. Shouting is involved in this too. And when we take that concept and we go to the book of Revelation, we find something very interesting. It says, then I saw. Now this is Revelation 14. This is in the same time setting as Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7, Revelation 13, that's when all these beasts come together. And we see something very interesting. Same thing in the book of Daniel. It says, then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel, the everlasting good news of the kingdom to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice. I want to stop right here. What did Yeshua said? When this gospel of the kingdom is preached in all the world, that's right here. This is right here. When this gospel is preached in all the world, the gospel of the kingdom is preached in all the world, he said, then the end will come. So here we have the gospel in Revelation 14, which is the same time context as Daniel chapter 7, the gospel going to every tongue, tribe, and people in the time of the end. And it goes on to say, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Now this is really, we just got to stop here for a moment and look at this. Saying with a loud voice, that's you and me. This is the angel, we know. What was it? It was the Father gave it to Yeshua, right? And gave it to the angel. And then the angel gave it to who? John. And then he gave it to the people. This is exactly what we see at the end. The angel now is flying in the midst of heaven, giving the message to his people. And you and I are going to give this message of judgment to the world. And that message will go forth, and then we will be saying, fear God. Why? Because they have no fear of God. They don't fear him who has power to destroy the whole soul, both body and soul. They don't have a fear for him. Our message is to fear him, give him glory for the hour of his judgment. How do you know what the hour of his judgment, when it starts? How are you going to give a message if you don't know when the judgment hour starts? How are you going to give this? How do you know when it starts? Because you know the sanctuary service. You know this. So at this time, when the little horn is doing its thing and judgment day comes in the sanctuary service, you're going to be able to give this message. We will be able to unite on this message. It says, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him. Why do you suppose it's to worship him? Why is that message? The hour of judgment, worship him. Because everyone's worshiping something else. We just read here that they're all worshiping what? The beast. The thing is, worship God. Now, do you know how we're supposed to worship him? Do you know when we're supposed to worship him? Aren't we supposed to come and present ourselves to him at certain times? Isn't there a code of worship laid down in the Bible? Could it be that at the time of the end, everyone's worshiping according to the world system and not according to our Father's system, which he instituted, which is contained in this book? primarily in the book of Leviticus, chapter 23? Is it possible that at the time of the end, God's people are saying, worship Him who made heaven and earth, the only true God, and so on? This will be the message. Now I want to look at something very interesting here. It's specified. Fear God, fear Elohim, the God of gods, for the hour of His judgment has come. Worship Him who made heaven and earth. Now this is really interesting. When we talk about worship, when we talk about biblical worship, we have a worship system. One of the systems on there can be found in the 10 Commandments. It's called the Sabbath Commandment, the fourth of the 10. It is in the heart of the 10 Commandments. It is the largest of all of the commandments, and it takes center stage in the commandments. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of Jehovah your God. In it you shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gate. So I'm thinking, let's get practical. Would this mean something like if you have a visitor that's staying in your house for the weekend and they want to use your washing machine on Sabbath, what would you say? No. No. This is just getting practical. If we don't lay down the law, so to speak, what kind of a witness to them is it going to be? It's the purpose of the commandment is to get people's attention that they're transgressing the commandment, because the hour of His judgment is nearing. If there was ever a time that we needed to preach the kingdom and pull out all the stops, all those things, all those ropes that are attached to us from holding back to do what we should be doing, it is now, folks. The time is running out very quickly, and we can tell that by these prophecies and how they're developing. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Very interesting here. It says here, for in 6 days Jehovah made the heavens and the earth. This is the call in Revelation. The one that made the heaven and the earth and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed, Jehovah blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Goes on to say in Exodus 31, very interesting, 12 and 13. And Jehovah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, surely my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Jehovah who sanctifies you. Now, I don't know if you've heard this before, but I have heard this before, is that I'm counted as keeping the Sabbath because I'm trying to work my way to the kingdom in keeping the law. Have you guys ever heard that? Is that just up in Canada we hear that? No. Okay. Well, when we go back to the Bible and actually see the purpose of the Sabbath, this is our Father's word here. We've got His word on this. This is my pastor's word. This is my barber's word. This is our Father's word. He says, He spoke to Moses, saying, the Sabbath is a sign between you and me, that you will know me, and that you will know that I'm your Redeemer. Now, does anyone not want to know Him, or they don't want to know that He's the Redeemer? Well, just don't keep the Sabbath then, because apparently, according to our Father, the Sabbath is a sign to know Him, that He's not only our Creator, but He's our Redeemer also. Why would we not want to keep the Sabbath? Is He not the same yesterday, today, and forever? Yeah, He changes not. That's what I read in this book. He changes not. This is the Sabbath now. When we look at this word sign, very interesting. Do some little homework here. Grab a concordance. It says it's probably from the word H225, a sense of appearing a signal, literally or figuratively. And then it goes on to say, as a flag, a beacon, a monument, omen, prodigy, evidence, mark. Interesting word, isn't it? A mark, a miracle, a sign, or a token. Now, you might not understand it, but because you keep the Sabbath, if you keep the Sabbath, do you understand you are a marked person? You're marked. And you know what? The little horn is going to know that because he knows the mark. He knows the mark. And he's going to set out to change it. We're going to look at that here very shortly. So now we're looking at this thing, and then we're looking at this sign and a seal. We're talking about a seal in Revelation. It says, till I seal the servants of God in their foreheads. Now when we look at a seal is very interesting. It contains a company's name. It contains the year of incorporation and the state in which the company was filed. And think of a corporate seal as an official signature. So does anyone have a seal? Well, I used to have a seal when we had a corporation. And we stamped our official documents on it. And it was the proof that this company, this seal, is doing it. They used to have seals back in the Old Testament. Remember Judah? When he had his staff, had his seal on it, the seal engraved on it. They knew when that thing rolled and it made an imprint, that was the staff of Judah. Judah had endorsed that. This is the same thing. We see this concept. So we see the Sabbath is a sign. It's a seal. What does it do? Let's look at this. This is very, very interesting. The company. What company? Elohim. In the beginning, Elohim. And it's interesting that it's plural. Now, who could that be? What company could that be? That Elohim. Something for us to think about. This is who it is that we're to worship. So his seal is in the Sabbath. It tells us who he is, and it says in the beginning. That's the starting place. That's when everything started happening. That's the date, if you will, of his incorporation. Whenever that was, in the beginning. The earth and the heavens. This is his dominion. So the Sabbath, within the Sabbath commandment, is the sign and the seal of the Almighty. This is why when you wear the Sabbath, you become marked with his seal. Is that good news? Yes. Absolutely. Now, we need to have our focus. Keeping the Sabbath is not going to save anyone, but if our focus is on him, the Creator and Redeemer, it will go a long ways in helping us get through this. Revelation 13:16 tells us that he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, slave and free, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. So now we're going to start contrasting this. What we're looking at our Father's sign, and now we're looking at the beast sign, and see if we can see something here. But this one says it's on a mark on the right hand or on the forehead. Did it say anything about that on the Sabbath? Did we see that in the Sabbath at all? No, we didn't see that. But we're going to see that in something else. Now, when we look at the word mark, it's kind of the same thing as sign, a scratch or etching. Of course, we've got a different word. This is a Greek word now. Stamp, sculptured figure. This is leading lots of people to think that this is a literal thing. But as God has signs that are figurative, these things are figuratively marked in us. I think it's more like talking about something that changes the way we think. This is what the Sabbath does. It changes how we operate, the things we do, and so on. The mark of the beast will be geared to change the way the world thinks. Maybe by accepting the mark of the beast, you will be able to buy and sell because you're working under their system. This is what it's telling us. And they will have a definite mark that will actually be in opposition to what God's marks are. Is there a sign out there in the world that is a sign of anyone's authority that is in contrast to the seventh-day Sabbath? What would that be? Would that be the first-day Sabbath? Have you ever had somebody, well, I keep my own Sabbath. You better check it out, because if it's not his Sabbath, it really doesn't matter what day you take off. But it's really interesting. We can see this now. We can see opposition. If our Father has a sign, and he says it's his Sabbath, his mark he places on people. And then we get to the book of Revelation, and we see that this beast power, this little horn power, has his mark that he places on people. Only this time it says in their hand and in their forehead. Well, what would it mean, your hand and your forehead? What would it be if you were placed something in your forehead? If it changed the way you think, would it come out in your hand? Yes, absolutely. So that it's going to change the way they think. It's going to come out in their hands. And we're told in Revelation and in Daniel, which we're going to see, that in the time of the end, the little horn power will give permission in the form of orders to do what to our Father's people? To put them to death, right? So, if you accept that mark, you will be able to kill people. How does that make you feel? Because that's what they're going to do. It will change, because they won't be able to buy or sell unless they receive the mark. But it doesn't stop there. They will be asked to kill and persecute God's people. And I've often said, the difference between true religion and false religion, the true religious people, our Father's people in the time of the end, they will die for their faith, but the wicked will kill for theirs. What a contrast. What a contrast. That's where we're going. That's where we're going. So we see here that in Exodus 13, talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread now, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, shall be as a sign to you on your hand. Interesting. Sign to you on your hand, a memorial between your eyes, that's your forehead, that Jehovah's law might be in your mouth, for with a strong hand Jehovah has brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now I just want to magnify this thing a little bit. We're not leaving the land of Egypt, the land of our bondage. We are leaving the land of this bondage for the promised land. We will sing a lot louder than they sang back here. It will be quite the celebration. So evidently, according to his word, this is Jehovah's word, he says that the Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread will be a sign, a mark on you. But not only on you, but specifically on your hand and on your forehead, that Jehovah's law may be in your mouth. Now this is a very interesting statement, because the people that I know that keep the Passover, they talk a lot about the law. Have you noticed that? Yeah, it's like all we talk about. Sometimes we talk too much about the law. We're so excited about it. And so people don't want to talk about it, but all about the law. But you know what? This battle that we're in is a battle between two kingdoms. The kingdom of righteousness and the kingdom of lawlessness. This is what this is about. The law should be on our tongue because judgment is coming, and the law is going to be used as a standard of righteousness in the judgment. This is why the law is so vitally important. Goes on to say in Deuteronomy 6, I want to just back up here for just a second. Speaking of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we kind of turn around and look at what happened back then. But we want to also, and I'm hoping before the series is over, is have a look at our grand exodus that we're going to have. And I think the Passover is going to play into that, because the words of our Master, he said, I have longed to eat this Passover with you. You finish it for me. I have longed to eat this Passover with you before I suffer, for I will no longer eat of it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom. What is the it? The Passover. Exactly. So we are going to have a grand exodus and a great celebration when we pass over from this land of bondage that we're in to the land of freedom, the promised land. That exodus back in the book of Exodus is actually a type of our grand Exodus at the end. It's coming. Hang on. You shall bind them, Deuteronomy, it says, you shall bind them, all his statutes. Context now. Take this back to the context. What it's talking about. All his statutes and his commandments as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes. Here we go again. Sign on the hands, frontlets. What does it do? When you keep our Father's law, I know, because I've experienced, it changes the way I think. I think a whole lot. The things that I used to love, I now hate. That's what it does for you. And of course, there's a process. I wish I could say all the things that tempt me, I hate them. But if I hold true to this thing, the further I get from my sin, the more I will hate it and despise it. It says that we will loathe our sins. We will hate them. And this is because that's what's held us back. And our Father wants to set us free from all this. This is what really the Feast of Unleavened Bread is about, being separated from sin. Isn't that what that's about? So with all of these things, they're said to be a mark or a sign that he places on our forehead and our hand. Why? Because there's a power at the end of time that will have their signs, their laws, their holy days, all of that stuff in opposition. So it really is a war between two kingdoms and their statutory holidays. Is this making any sense at all? That's why the decision that we have to make, this book, Yeshua summed it all up. He said, these are they that testify of me. Who is he? He's our king, he's our lawgiver, and he's our redeemer. That's Isaiah. That's what it says back there. So if we aren't in harmony with his law actually saves us from eternal death. We realize that, right? But if he saves us from eternal death, is he actually saving us from his law? No. Paul said it substantiates his law. It actually makes it more honorable, as we see in Isaiah as well. So we can't do away with the law just because he redeems us. I had a speeding ticket one time, but it was just a warning ticket. And you know what? I was really careful the rest of the day to stay underneath the thing. Because if I would have got caught by the policeman again that same day and he would have checked out his little computer, 2 hours ago, somebody just gave you a warning ticket. Oh yeah, but that allowed me to speed all day long after that. This is just crazy, this idea that because he saved us from sin does not mean he saved us from keeping the law. Not keeping the law is anarchy. That's everyone doing what's right in their own mind. Our Father knows what's right, and he's given us the commandments. And when we stay within his hedge of commandments, life is safer. It's much safer. We shall bind them. That means embrace them. Behold, the day is coming, burning like an oven, and all the proud, yes, all who do wickedly against the law will be stubble, and the day which is coming shall burn them up, says Jehovah of hosts. That will leave them neither root nor branch. Now somebody please tell me, past, future, or present? What did I say that? Yes, that's what I said. Past, future, should be present or future. What is it? This is future. This has not happened yet. Context. Has not happened yet. But to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in its wings, and you shall go out and grow fat like stall-fed calves. You shall trample the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day that I do this, says Jehovah of hosts. Here again, past or future? Future. This is future. Remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel. Who is Israel today? If you are Yeshua's, you're Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Is Israel Abraham's seed? Yes. Did Yeshua come out of Israel, the 12 tribes? Yes. If we are grafted into this house, we are then considered Israel. So apparently, according to Malachi, at the time of the end, there would be a call to remember a law that Moses was given. You know, some people just say, no, that's the law of Moses. We don't need to keep the law of Moses. That's kind of a misnomer, isn't it? It's just too bad it got sort of messed up like that. It's actually our Father's law that he gave to Moses, and that's how he does it, and then he gave it to the people. So really, it's not the law of Moses. It's the law that came through Moses, and that's how we got this that we have. So remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for who? All Israel. If you and I are Israel, if we count ourselves as Israel, then we will keep these laws that it's talking about. You know, boy, should I do this? Yes, let's do it. The only ones that come out of the Day of Atonement on the right side of the fence are Israel. That's it. The only ones that are saved in the time of the end are the ones that have been grafted into the house of Israel. That's a fact. That's Bible. So anyone that's not keeping his laws when the Day of Atonement comes and goes, they are done. They're done. That's sanctuary. That's the way the sanctuary is constructed. Then he goes on to say, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming great and dreadful day of the Lord. Past or future? Exactly. We're still talking future. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. You know what? I forgot to say something. I just have to go back here and say this. Because it says, remember the law of Moses. I just want to make a distinction, because I know there are people, when they read this, they only see the 10 Commandments. Are you aware of that? There are people that read this and say that's just talking about the 10 Commandments. But it specifies. There is no need to misunderstand this. It says here, it says, with the statutes and judgments. Now I want to go even further and take with the out, because it's in italics. It is not even supposed to be there, or it doesn't need to be there. Now let's read it without that. See what it says. Remember the Torah of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel, the statutes, or statutes and judgments. This specifies. Now, honor your mother and father. What is that? That's one of the 10, but is that a statute? That's a statute. The 10 Commandments are all statutes. They're a legal restriction, or a promise, if you will. Don't have any images. Is that a statute? Exactly. When it's said like this, the Torah of Moses, it's all inclusive. You can't just say this is the 10 Commandments. You can't do it. It's everything. You know, they had a law, and I don't know if you guys know this, but my neighbor had some really good land. And I was sorely tested to move my property marker over here, because I could get another 10 rows of corn. What commandment would that fall under? Stealing. Exactly. So when we look at these statutes, when we start looking at how you're supposed to treat your neighbor, we can take all of these statutes and we can connect them. Yeshua said, on these 2 commandments, love your neighbor and yourself, hang all the law and the prophets. Everything. It all comes back to love our Father and your neighbor as yourself. All of this stuff. That's what it's about. Goes on to say, behold, I'll send you Elijah before the coming great and dreadful day of the Lord. And or Jehovah, and I know there's all kinds of speculation. So let's take a reading, shall we? Who here thinks Elijah's coming back? Wow. Not very many. You're not brave, are you? Well, don't underestimate. He came and visited Yeshua one time on the Mount of Transfiguration. He seems to be out there somewhere. It says, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming and dreadful day of Jehovah. We also see a being that sort of looks like could be a little bit like Elijah in chapter 7 or chapter 11 of Revelation as well. He would turn the hearts of the father to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. Now, this is very interesting. So he's turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to their fathers. So this I can see. Can you see families coming together, uniting over these truths? Is anyone experiencing that? Families this should draw families together. These truths should draw families together. But I love the way it says, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. What is this here? When it's said like that, what is it actually? Isn't it a condition? Just a minute. Just the way it's read like that. Isn't this a condition? If everyone in this world, on the earth, turned to the law of Moses, including the statutes and judgments, this says he wouldn't strike the earth with a curse when he comes. That's what this says. Now, is this going to happen? What do you think? Odds are it won't happen. And we've got some pretty good scripture to back it up, and we're going to look at it. But the possibility is out there. If everyone in the world turned, if we did our work well and did what we were asked to do, teach all nations, and they turned, then I believe things could go a little differently. But the question is, will people turn? No, they won't. Goes on to say in 1 Kings, speaking of Elijah now, he answered, I have not troubled Israel. This is when he was going to the king, because the king was accusing Elijah of troubling Israel. Just the same way, there's a reason why people will be persecuting God's people, our Father's people, at the end of time. They will be called the troublers of this world. And so they're going to be persecuted, just the same way Elijah was. Goes on to say, I have not, but you and your father's house have, in that you have forsaken the commandments of Jehovah. So the whole issue at the time of the end is going to be the Elijah issue. That's why Elijah's coming forward in his people, this message that's coming forward. In Isaiah chapter 24, it says, Behold, Jehovah makes the earth empty and makes it waste, distorts its surface and scatters abroad its inhabitants. Goes on to say, and it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the servant, so with the master, as with the maid, so with the mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the creditor, so with the debtor. Why does it say it like this? It's a demonstration that nobody's excluded here. The same thing that happens to this guy is going to happen to this guy. That's what it's trying to show us. So at this time, when this happens, everyone is included. Nobody gets out. The land shall be entirely emptied and utterly destroyed, for Jehovah has spoken his word. The earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth languish. Now, what is going on here? Goes on to say, the earth is defiled under its inhabitants because they have transgressed what? The Torah. It's actually what it says. They have transgressed the Torah, changed the ordinance. You want to look at that word ordinance? It's actually appointment. Oh my goodness. How things get changed. Very interesting. They changed the law and the appointments. They'll have their own Sabbath. They will have their own feasts. And everyone, just like in the time of Daniel, they were forced to worship the image, Guess what? Revelation, there's an image to be set up that everyone's forced to worship the image again. We see the same thing at the sound of the music. You want to believe music's going to play a huge role in the time of the end. This is how music works. Have you ever talked to somebody that went to this love fest, or call it whatever you want? These big, in these coliseums they hold it, it's all these Christian youth and all these people come and you talk to them and they said, the worship was so good. Have you ever had anyone tell you that? And what did that prove? What did it prove that the worship was so good? It proved that the Spirit was there. I heard this the other day. Everyone was there, the Spirit was there, and we were all just weeping. And I'm thinking, where in the Bible does it say when the Spirit's poured out, everyone's going to be weeping? It's not there. There's times when we cry, but just because people are brought to an emotional place where they're all weeping is no proof that the Holy Spirit is there. Now, it's really amazing the way your brain works. This is why, the enemy, he knows all about music. You know that, right? I understand he may have led the heavenly orchestra. He understands what pulses, what everything does to your body. It opens an access to the mind. It actually has a physical effect on you as well. Music is a very interesting thing, and they use it at the beginning of worship. Do you know why they use it at the beginning of worship? To open your mind. If music is true and music is good, and the message that comes after the music is good and true and right and just and wholesome, because of the music opening your mind, that message goes in. Is that making sense to you? Music is a tool. It's a tool that our Father has given for us to rejoice and embrace. But the enemy of souls has nothing original. He's using what God has given, and he's twisting it. So when the worship is good, guess what? Your mind is opened. You're ready to receive. So with this great worship, you're ready to receive all these lies and deceptions. Is that making any sense? The enemy is going to use music to his full advantage to feed us with all kinds of deception. And most of the time, the deceptions are going to play into the carnal nature. Most of the time, this is how it goes. It's a measuring. It's a way we can measure. How is this appealing to me? How are these truths appealing to me? Goes on to say this word ordinance. I just wanted to look at that here for a second. From 27:10, an enactment. What are the festivals? They're enactments. They're rehearsals. This is amazing. So the world has not only changed the Torah, they've changed the appointments that our Father has with his people. Why would you change an appointment? A husband and wife, if you have a time, once a month or once a week where you go out and the kids are behind you and you focus on each other, highly recommend that. Focus on each other and you will develop a good relationship. But if you don't spend any time with your wife, if you don't spend any quality time, if it's just time with you and your kids all the time, you don't have that intimacy. It's the same thing. We need the time of intimacy with our Father and his Son so that we can develop a relationship. That's why the morning and evening, that's why the Sabbath, that's why all the festivals. It's to develop that relationship. It's amazing to me, the enemy's got all these things about works. Have you ever heard it said, it's just about developing a relationship with Jesus? Do we only hear that in Canada? No. They're saying that everywhere. It is just about developing, but the question is, how do you do it? You keep his appointments. You keep his dates. That's how you develop a relationship with him. Goes on to say space. It says, hence an appointment of time or space, quantity, labor or usage, appointed, bound, commandment, convenient, custom. That's what these festivals are, they're customs. It says in Yeshua, it says, as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. A law, measure, necessary ordinance, portion, set time, or statute. And to me, this is just so amazing how we can just nail this down. A good Bible study just nails this stuff down. There doesn't need to be any question in what this is talking about here. Isaiah 24 goes on to say, therefore the curse, this is the curse in Malachi, therefore the curse has devoured the earth. He says, lest, if you remember this in Malachi, it says he won't devour the earth. And the curse won't devour it. But because they've done this, we've got the rest of the story in Isaiah, they do this. Therefore it says, and those who dwell in it are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. Man, my question is, I don't know if it's yours, but my question is, who are the men that are left when all this happens? When all the smoke clears, who are the men that are left? Revelation leaves no room to guess on this. It says, the question is asked at just prior to this next second coming. This is in Revelation chapter 5 through 7. And it ends at the second coming again. This is another layer when it goes through the horsemen. You guys are familiar with the horsemen of Revelation? There's a great persecution in there about speaking of the time of the end. And it says, who's able to stand when Yeshua comes? And then it breaks into the 12 tribes of Israel, the 144,000. They are the ones that are left when he comes. Revelation 12:17, it says, and the dragon was enraged with the woman who went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of Jehovah and have the testimony. Here we see again, we can see Genesis to Revelation. This is all fitting together rather perfectly. Some people say, well, you talk a lot about the commandments. No, I'm just quoting Bible here. This is not me. This is his word. And this is the time in which we're living in. Revelation 14:12 here again says, here's the patience of the saints, or the endurance. When it says it like that, they're hanging on. What are they hanging on to? Here are those that keep. They will not let go of the Ten Commandments and the statutes and the judgments. And they have the faith of Yeshua. The faith of Yeshua was such a faith that he would not sin no matter what temptation. That's where we're going. That's where we're going. Goes on to say in Revelation 22:12-14, I put these in red, and behold, I am coming quickly. My reward is with me to give everyone according to his work. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Blessed are those who do his commandments. Not talk about them, but actually do them, that they may have a right to the tree of life and enter through the gates of the city. Now what this tells me, this is telling me that those that do not keep his commandments have what kind of right to the tree of life? No right. Now the only way that they're going to have, anybody's going to get eternal life is through the tree of life, because we know the tree of life is coming back in. It will be in the New Jerusalem when it comes down out of God from heaven. It'll be the tree of life that gives us that eternal life. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I never really understood this next verse, but now I do. Teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the ages. Has that happened yet? No, it hasn't happened yet. But when I used to read this, teaching them to observe all things, you know, the New Testament Christians use this all the time. They evangelize the world because of this. Go make disciples of all nations. Well, disciple, the word disciple comes from the word discipline. When you are in discipline, what are you in? You're discipleship, but we don't want to go around in a circle here playing with the word. Discipline comes from the concept of training. We are in training is what we're doing. We're denying ourselves to become more like him, teaching them to observe. What is he talking about? Teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded. When I first realized that it was Yeshua on the top of Mount Sinai giving his law to Moses, I thought, oh my goodness, this is actually teaching. This is going along with Malachi, that when Yeshua said, when Elijah comes, he will do what? He will restore all things. You remember that? He will restore all things. What is that restoration? That's that restoration of his law. It's the decision that people are going to have to make. Which kingdom and its laws are you going to be subject to? It's just that simple is what's going on here. So part of our job as to teach all nations, to teach them about the things that Yeshua told us to observe and to keep, which is his law, his Torah. Goes on to say, which we all know this, it says in John 14, 15, 16, if you love me, keep my commandments. And I will pray the Father, and he will give you another helper, that he may abide with you forever. Now, I can only imagine. I got to look at the time here. Wow, we're almost out of time. Okay, maybe I better not go here. Let's do it, though. Okay, so Paul says that we could make the people of Israel, the Jews, jealous. You tell me how we make them jealous. Do we make them jealous as Christians by keeping a day that our Father never commanded? By keeping feasts that he never commanded? By eating things that he never commanded? Where's the jealousy in that? Like, that makes no sense. Unless we're carrying the things that Jewish people and their ancestors have carried, they're not going to get too jealous about us. But I submit to you that when we start acting like saved people and doing what he's asked us to do, we will be blessed beyond measure, and they will get jealous. This is what he's asking us to do. He's asking us to create jealousy within his own people and to show the nations the righteous laws. It says that in Deuteronomy. It says that when all these nations see all these righteous commandments, these are things that are supposed to attract them because they can see sense in it. Ezekiel 36:26, people say, well, all you need is the Holy Spirit. I agree. All you need is the Holy Spirit. Yeshua in you, the hope of glory. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take a heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. Ezekiel goes on to say, I will put my spirit. Is this the same spirit that people are getting in possession today? Oh, good question. How do you tell? This is how you tell. It says, I will put my spirit within you and cause you, or to motivate you, to walk in my statutes, and you will keep my judgments and do them. Then you shall dwell. You see, the Spirit comes with a promise. I will do this, then you will do this, then, as a product, you will dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I will be your Elohim. When we accept what he's trying to do when we accept the Holy Spirit working in our lives, causing us to walk in his laws, he says, then you are my people. Not before. This idea that we can be his people and be in full disobedience is total craziness. It's a big deception, and most of Christianity has bought into this deception. But we're not to laugh at them, because I came out of that. We came out of that, and we walked into this glorious light. And we've been asked to share in mercy with these people. Be merciful with them. Don't go with the sword and just slice and dice them all up. These people need light, and they need to understand what's going on, because judgment is coming. The prophecies reveal judgment's coming. Matthew 17:11 says, Yeshua answered and said to them, indeed, Elijah is coming first, and he will restore all things. Elijah's coming before he comes. We read about that in Malachi. I believe that's what Yeshua was quoting, before the great and dreadful day of Jehovah. Elijah's coming first, what? To call people back to obedience. This was the Elijah message. We are not the troublers of this world. It is you, it is them, not you guys. It is them that are the troublers, because they have forsaken the commandments of Jehovah. This is the reality. This is why I believe this world is in such a mess. Because they have walked away from their Creator. They have walked away from their Creator, and our job is to try and draw them back. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear Elohim and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. The wisest man, other than, I think, Yeshua, that lived, Solomon, when he finally came to his senses and put his trash behind him, he recognized that the most important thing for us to do is to follow our Father's commandments. And that's what we need to do. This whole thing is coming to a close soon. What we lost in Eden will be restored. And the reason why we lost it in Eden is because we transgressed. Our first parents transgressed the command of our Father. It's going to be restored to a people that have learned that lesson of transgression, and they will bring themselves under the authority of the Most High. I'm going to end with this text here. We're walking into a time where there will be a war between two kingdoms. There is a war now. It will culminate in the future. A war between two kingdoms. The kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. The kingdom of righteousness and unrighteousness. The kingdom of obedience versus the kingdom of disobedience. The law, or the kingdom of law and order, or the kingdom of lawlessness and disorder. The reality of it is we have all sinned and fallen short. We all have been given a gift of righteousness. Friends, let's take care of it. Let's possess it. Let's own it. Let's walk in it and live like our Father wants us to live. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you again for your word. It is so sure. And Father, we know that these things are going to come to pass because we've seen so much truth. And we ask, Father, as we go about our daily lives and you put us in front of people, help us to see everyone we meet through your eyes. That we would reach out, that we would help people understand that the closing scenes of this world's history are now in the process of fulfillment. And soon all the things that have been foretold will come to pass. Father, help us to understand these things. Help us to have confidence. And Father, help us to be intelligent when we speak to people by doing the homework that you've given us. Father, we ask that you bless us and keep us in your will, we pray. In Yeshua's name, amen. Amen. Do we have any questions? We probably have just a few minutes if we have some questions. You have a question? We had a mic. Yeah, right here. Come up here, Judy.
So in Revelation 13:9, right before it said that we have to have patience, it said something about those who take into captivity will be taken captive, and those who kill with the sword have to be killed with the sword. Is that there to affect our conduct during these days? Are we not allowed to take action and blow up things that ought to be blown up that are evil? Are we supposed to sit tight?
That's a really good question. Okay, context now. Let's look at the context. This is about people that are killing, that are persecuting. This is about a group of people that are going to take up the sword or whatever means, and they're going to kill God's people. And it's a warning to them. That's what the context is. Now, can we carry that? Your question is, can we defend ourselves? I think that's kind of your part of that question. If we defend ourselves and somebody ends up dead when we defend ourselves. It's really interesting in the Torah, and I go back to this, in the Torah, if somebody came into your house at night and they ended up dead, that's their problem. Like if they came to cause harm or whatever, that was their problem. So I don't think that this is the context of this verse.
Mm-hmm. In the Malachi verse, it also said something before that we would trod on the evil.
They'd be ashes under our feet.
So is that just after he comes back and then we join him to whoop some people? Or could it be if those first couple things are a warning to them, not to us, the Malachi verse is saying we could, if we're called by the Spirit, there could be bands of people that actually go out and attack the evil and have victory over them in the Spirit righteously.
Okay. I don't think we can get that out of Malachi. It just says that they're going to be ashes under our feet. And it says that in Isaiah, I'm just looking at the verses we quoted tonight. In Isaiah, it says that they will be burned. So that would be the ashes part. And in the context of when he arrives, that they're in full disobedience, they haven't remembered the law and so on. So as far as, are we going to rally the troops and destroy evil? That's a subject for study. Okay. We didn't cover that tonight. Right behind you. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Lots of questions. With the image in Daniel 2 at the toes, it says that they will not, that iron and clay really don't stick together very well. So I guess, can we just assume that those kingdoms at the end, there's going to be a lot of strife in that composite beast, in that New World Order?
Absolutely.
Even though it's a New World Order, it's going to have an appearance of adhesion. There's going to be a lot of internal strife, I would assume, if that follows Daniel 2.
Well, we've got other texts that would allude to that. Where the Spirit is, there is peace, right? So this beast power in the kings, there's only one Spirit that controls that. So yeah, it's, I get this idea of evil as they don't get along, and the kings of the world never really got along. They just had the same enemy, and that's really what it's going to be. Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to, I'm looking at the dates, and so is the little horn going to reign then from the 0 days to the 1260? Is that how that?
Yes.
Okay.
And we're gonna get into that time prophecy next time. We're going to open that up wider. So yes, absolutely. And that's all the time it gets is 1260 days or time times and a half or 42 months. And that's why I believe it's so clear. 7 times in between Daniel and Revelation, 3 different languages, and also 3 different ways it's given. 3.5 years, time times and a half, 42 months, 1260 days. That's all it gets, and we're gonna look at that closer to get more flesh on that next week. Yes.
All right. Well, you just said that next week you're going to cover that period, because I know you talked about the various beasts and the horns and the kingdoms, and you mentioned specific horns relating to specific countries like the U.S. and France and England and Russia and China. I didn't. Maybe I missed it because I was taking notes. I didn't think I heard you hear you say who you thought the little horn was, before which 3 other horns were plucked up.
Oh, you didn't hear? That? You didn't hear when I said what it was?
Okay.
I gave you some clues. All along, we're going to give clues. I'm not trying to keep it secret. I want you to tell me who it is.
So what's your topic for next week?
Topic for next week, we're going to go into Daniel 7 again, because we only got started in Daniel. We just got to the judgment. We need to go through verse by verse, and this is how I know I'm not taking things out of context. We have to read every verse. I can't cherry pick. I can't take one from here and one from over here and one from over here. We have to get the entire context, and that's how we know that we're onto it. We're not. You can build a house out of all different kinds of bricks, but unless they're all the same brick, it's going to look like a mess when you get it done. So we're going to go systematically through this so that we can know, not just pulling things out of thin air. This is actually the chronology. Same way we started with Matthew 24. We went through every verse and saw the delineation of the events. That's how we know what's going to happen, because in a roadmap, you have to get to this corner, then you have to go this way, and then you have to go this way. You can't jump. You can't do it. So we have to go through systematically. So Daniel 7, we're going to get into Revelation 13, and we're going to open that up. Does anyone know that there's another beast in Revelation 13? We're going to look at that, this other beast that forms an image to the beast. That would be the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the seven-headed animal, that conglomeration. There's another power that makes an image to that. We're going to look at that. So Daniel 7, Revelation 13, and we'll probably get into Revelation 17 as well, as well as other places, but those will be our primary. So as I said before, if you could read these chapters, you're going to be in a better position when I go through them, because you're going to say, oh yeah, I remember that. And it's just like, so it would really help if you want to do that. Go through Daniel 7 again, and you could just do some review as well. And if you wanted even more review, you could just go back and start watching these again. I know I've talked to some people that are doing that, and they're getting a little more out of it, or things are making a little more sense. So Revelation 13, 14, 17, and Daniel 7 will be the primary focuses that we're going to look at next week. All right? Among other things, but that's going to be the general. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Because we got to go. They're going to have a movie in here tonight. So thank you again for coming. It's been great, and I love sharing this stuff. We need to get this information out. We need to get it out so we can help people know and be intelligent when they choose the kingdom that they're going to have part of. Thank you. Praise our Father. Okay. Drive safely, everyone.